Hello, Mark. First of all, thank you so much for being here. In an event that addresses issues regarding media, I must ask you, what do you mean by who you are is what media are?
Well, who I am is what media are, or what media helps me become, is basically a warning or a reminder that the media we use to express ourselves, to learn about the world, are not cold, neutral technologies that only become warm and personal because of the way we use them, but that these are technologies that have their own personality. For example, on Facebook, you can only like something. On Twitter, you can only favorite or heart something. These interfaces structure our behavior in a specific way. They prefer us to be a certain type of human being. And there's nothing wrong with that, that's fine. But we shouldn't mistake that as being natural. And so this line, who I am is what media are, reminds me that the media that I use have personality, have agency, and I have to be careful or mindful in the way I use them, because otherwise I might not be myself.
In your presentation, you also said that when we use media, you make media.
Yes.
What do you mean by this?
Well, most often these days when people use media, they are in fact making media, because most of our media time gets spent online, and most of our time online gets spent in social media. And that is everything from YouTube and Facebook and Twitter, but also, for example, using a search engine like Google. Google works so well because it learns from our behavior and the behavior of everyone else who uses Google. So in that sense, every time we type in something on Google to find something, we actually produce a certain type of reality as we make media. Facebook would be empty and poor if we didn't fill it with our life. And so it's striking that most of our media use today is actually us making and producing a certain type of reality, a certain type of story, a certain type of media. And in the old days, most of our media use was media consuming. We would read the newspaper or a magazine or a book, we would watch television, we would listen to the radio. And today we still do those three things, but they have become a limited way of using media.
So from a media point of view, what stands out from your essays is the human factor the media uses in their impact on society. So to what extent are the polymedia embodied in us? And do you consider that they can be considered as being harmful?
In my work, I try to prevent us from looking at technology or media as some outside force that's coming for us and that we have to either protect ourselves against or fight or surrender to. I think those three perspectives, they might be valuable, but they're not helpful, because we cannot ignore the fact that we live in a world and in a society where using media and technology responsibly and mindfully is in fact our best guarantee for survival. If you don't understand media, if you have problems expressing yourself in media, if you don't know how to validate and evaluate information, you have a hard time surviving in this world. So to attack or denounce or fight media would be a problem for you. So I think the first step is to consider media as an extension of who we are, or as actually productive of our humanity. Like the way we are today as human beings, the success we have in surviving on this planet is produced by technology. Without technology, we wouldn't be where we are now. That doesn't mean that where we are now is perfect, right? There's plenty of problems, a lot of them caused by the very technology that brought us here. But to think of technology and media as having an outside effect on us is actually ignoring how much we can do. And I've tried to focus in my work on what we can do rather than what happens to us. And that's a small but I think important shift in the way of thinking about the effect that media has on us.
So today we have digital media that are embodied, invisible, immediate. So in your opinion, what is the role of society in this world and life umbilically connected with media that you described?
Well, I think what makes me optimistic and happy about this situation of a world and a society that lives in media is that I hope it makes us more aware than we perhaps already are, that we're all connected, not just through the internet, but that the connection through the internet makes us aware that we're also connected in all kinds of other ways. I mean, think about it. If you read any kind of newspaper anywhere in the world, the most important stories you will read in that newspaper are stories that do not care about national boundaries. They don't care about race or religion or gender, because they are about topics that affect all of us equally. Global warming, international migration, terrorism. I mean, these are issues and topics that we all have to come to terms with. And so in that sense, I think the role of society and media is really to embrace and acknowledge our interconnectedness, both physically through media, but also symbolically through the way we understand each other in the world we live in. And then through that connection, start working on solutions. I mean, Portugal cannot solve the problem of Europe. Europe cannot solve the problem of Europe, only the world can. The Netherlands cannot solve global warming, only the world can. And we perhaps, we hear this rhetoric, but I find it interesting to explore the fact that we actually, all of us experience it simply by switching on the computer. We are drawn into a world that we cannot ignore anymore. And so that's ultimately my goal in looking at society in that way. So that's a hopeful way. And I think research, academics, philosophy without an element of hope is pointless.
You were talking about borders and cultural boundaries. McLuhan spoke of a borderless world.
Right.
And he did it before the existence of the internet and technology. So by your essays, they talk about mobile technologies and prosthetic artifacts. Can this idea be extended to man's own body, or is there a border?
That's a great question. We like to think of our bodies as coherent, constrained entities, right? I can do certain things with my body and not other things. And this is different for everyone. Somebody who is born with a handicap can only do this. Somebody who has had an accident can only do that. And of course, we are, in our society, we work on our bodies constantly. Like for everybody, we are forced to go into the gym and eat, diet and all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, we bump up against this natural border. I think that's the illusion. What is interesting is the moment you add media to the mix, you begin to appreciate that actually our bodies aren't as bordered, as boundaried as we think they are. If you think about me, for example, I like to think that I'm a natural body, but if I do this, I'm blind. Or not completely blind, but I cannot see you and I cannot see the world around me. This technology extends my body outward. And that's the way to think about computers and about smartphones and about the internet as well. It draws us into another world. It makes us see, hear, and sometimes even smell and otherwise experience a world that perhaps would be impossible to do without media. And it doesn't exactly make us borderless, but it extends, it constantly, our experience of borders is constantly stretched, and which can be unsettling. For example, when we experience a traumatic event in media, a terrorist attack, for example, and we see it happen on live television or on our Twitter feed or on Facebook, it's awful. It really impacts us emotionally. And that's an experience of a border, of our boundary that gets stretched really far. And I think that raises the responsibility we all have in what are we going to do with this? Because to just afterwards just shut down the door and like, I don't want to hear this anymore is almost impossible. And I would say it's irresponsible. So it's not so much borderless that we are or have become, but I think that our experience of borders or boundaries around ourselves as human beings or as bodies is constantly stretched in all directions, which is unsettling. It's an uncanny experience. But uncanniness is a good starting point for analysis.
In your opinion, is there space for men outside the media realm, or do you consider that are we losing ourselves in our technology, as you said?
Mm-hmm. We can lose ourselves to technology, absolutely. Both in terms of the fact that our humanity is produced by technology, like the way we have used technologies in our history as humanity has made us who we are today. The way we've used technologies like fire or the wheel or writing, or that is you cannot separate our humanity from technology, and not today and not 2,000 years ago. So that's an illusion to take those two worlds apart. To lose ourselves in technology would be the consequence of not taking technology seriously, of not really thinking about technology. And it's like everything. That what you refuse to see will get power over you, right? If you refuse to really explore your inner motivations, they end up running your life. And if you refuse to understand and appreciate and think about the role of technology in your life, it will end up running your life, and therefore you will lose yourselves to technology. But technology doesn't make us lose ourselves in it, right? I mean, we have agency, we have power, we have ways of using technology in all kinds of ways that still give us responsibility and opportunity. So to make out technology as either fantastic or awful is ignoring the fact that we are technological beings. And I think that should be the first step to then deciding afterwards. And that to me is the most important question is not what is technology doing to us? The most important question is what do we want from the world that we live in and from the society that we've made and from the relationships that sustain us. And if we have the answer to that, how are we going to take responsibility for that desire and use technology to get there?
And do you think that all these media give media and the powers to be a panoptic view over our lives that will, in a certain way, empower them to an unseen and eventually dangerous degree?
Well, the thing is, a traditional view of media and technology and society is indeed that we live in a world where we are constantly being observed and watched and monitored and everything is scrutinized. And I don't think that idea is wrong. It's just that it underestimates how much of this surveillance is done by us. Like we all carry around technology in our pockets that is far superior in its ability to record and store and archive the lives of the people around us than the cameras that are in the streets, right? I mean, our smartphone is the ultimate surveillance device, and we use it every day, many times a day. So again, for me, this is an example of how acknowledging and recognizing how much technology is part of who we are gives us gives us individual responsibility. And it's not so much about switching off that technology. It's about understanding how we use it and then thinking like, what kind of story do I really want to tell with my technology? I mean, what do I find important to share and to show and to know? And those are questions that we need to ask, not so much whether or not we live in a society that is a surveillance society or something. Well, we do. That's a given. But it's not that we are being surveyed, it's that we are the surveyors. And so what are we going to do with that responsibility?
Now talking a little bit more specific about journalism and newsmaking, a few years ago you referred to journalism as a zombie institution.
Yes.
So what do you mean by this, and in your opinion, what is the future for undergraduate and graduate students and future professionals of the world of media?
Journalism is a zombie institution, that refers to the sociology of Ulrich Beck, who makes the argument that in the field of sociology and social sciences, a lot of the things we study are zombies, in the sense that in our work we still pretend that they are there and that they function the same way they've always functioned, and we understand them in those terms. But what we fail to acknowledge that kind of way of doing things and functioning doesn't work anymore. And that's not the best way to understand it anymore. So in that sense, they are like zombies. They're living because they're still newspapers and they're still television. But they're also dead, is that the way newspapers and television function in society is not the same as it used to be. And the way journalists work in these organizations is not the same as it used to be. So they're living and dead at the same time, hence zombies. So journalism is a zombie institution because on the one hand, it looks and acts like it's always been the same. From 100 years ago, every day you have a new newspaper, in the evening you have nice evening television news, you have websites where this is the most important news of the day. That's still alive. And still every day lots of journalists produce that kind of stories and in those kind of media. At the same time it's dead because the majority of journalists today don't work for these news organizations anymore. The majority of stories today are not produced by these news organizations, they're produced by news agencies that live virtually, like Reuters or AFP or the AP, or those kind of organizations. And the images that we see are actually made by citizens on their cell phone cameras, and they are produced by people who share news on Twitter and on Facebook. So the future for students who want to go into journalism, I think, is to stop thinking about journalism in terms of media companies and organizations. So to stop thinking about Publico or the New York Times or the BBC, but to start thinking more fundamentally about what is the role and function of journalism in society, and how am I personally going to take responsibility for that function? What can I do to make journalism? And that can be, you can try to get a job at Publico, and then that's wonderful if that works. 99% of the time that won't work. Or you can start your own company and do a startup, or you can make a team of journalists in different European countries, apply for funds and grants and to produce your own investigative pieces. But there's so many opportunities. None of them are necessarily inside the traditional way of how journalism has operated in the past. And so I think that's the way of thinking about the future, is not so much looking at, once I get into the system of journalism, I'm going to be a journalist. No, it's like, how can I be a journalist for myself? What is my added value? What is my definition of being an autonomous, independent worker? What is truth for me? Not for the newspaper or the news organization, but for me. Like, how am I going to take responsibility? And then the next thing, I think, and this is more practical advice, is to never ever do it alone. It's what I tell my students is make international friends and relationships, form teams and collectives, do things together. Don't do journalists on your own, because it's too hard, it's not so much fun, And in this new media environment that we're in, you need expertise from different disciplines and different ways of looking at things, both in terms of technology, using different technologies, but also just different countries, different cultures. The more you combine that, I think the better chance you have to be a really great journalist. And there's still a huge demand for really great journalism.
What's the message you would like to the audience to get from your presentation?
I think a couple of things. The key first is to recognize and acknowledge that our lives cannot be, and the way we make sense of each other and the world we live in, cannot be separated from media. That this isn't necessarily good or bad for us. It just means that we have a responsibility. And that the stories we tell in media about ourselves and each other are up to us to decide what kind of stories these are. Are these stories about, just yourself, so that your selfie looks good all the time and you look beautiful and nice and you're successful? Or are these stories about things that you really care about and that you feel people should know and that you have made an effort to know what you're talking about? It's I guess, and this has been said many times before, but I agree with it. It's in a nutshell, it would be: don't hate the media, become the media.
Okay. And what do you think about events like this Congress of SOPCOM?
It's wonderful. I mean, the thing is that, like with media, our field is global, right? I mean, one of the most beautiful things about being a media scholar or student is that the media and your field is drawing you into a global conversation. The problem with that is that conversation often gets dominated by a handful of people and countries, specifically the United States and the UK, or people who speak English. And national conferences and local conferences and meetings such as SOPCOM give us a chance to both connect on a smaller level, but because SOPCOM and conferences like SOPCOM make an effort to reach out to academics in other parts of the world, such as me, it gives me an enormous chance and opportunity to connect with parts of the world and communities of scholars and colleagues that I otherwise would not meet. So this is a tremendous value that it adds and that it brings to our field.